In this episode of Children of Heroes, we headed to Ruislip at the northwest outskirts of London, where we talked to Petr Dušek and Paula Bullent, children of Flight Lieutenant Petr Filip Dušek.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your father served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. Could you tell us more about his military service?
He started his military service in the army when he arrived from France, because he was fighting in France before they evacuated France. He arrived ready to train. We have a picture of him riding a motorcycle around as part of his training in England, and one day somebody came round and said, "Has anybody got any interest in flying?" And he thought that he would survive better by flying than he would having been through what he had been in the army. So he volunteered and through that became a navigator. And that was because he was an amazing mathematician. Of course, in those days, they didn't have special computers and the rest. It all had to be what was in your brains. He then obviously became part of the Czech 311 squadron.
They were very short of pilots and navigators at the time because they'd had such heavy losses. So he felt that he could contribute in that way.
Eventually they decided that 311 Squadron was going to become maritime rather than a bomber squadron that was flying over Europe. And I do remember one thing he said was it probably saved his life, the fact he spent so much time flying over the Atlantic and saw very little action.
Although they did lose quite a lot of planes over the Atlantic, because there were such long treks. Things happened and you knew that if you ditched that plane, you'd had it really.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Flying for 12 hours, hunting submarines. Later on, as the war progressed, he then went to the Far East. When the war was over, obviously he was demobbed.
And he returned back to Czechoslovakia.
And they did these special flights from Blackbush Airport back to Prague.
What did he do in Czechoslovakia?
He became part of the Civil Airlines.
Czech Airlines.
Yes, yes.
And your mother?
My mother went to live in Brno with her mother-in-law, and Dad used to come from Prague to Brno to see her at weekends. And then finally, when Mother became pregnant with Daphne, they all moved to Prague so that she was nearer to him in his work. And then, of course, it wasn't very long before trouble started, and they couldn't get the food tickets that they wanted, and he was being pointed out as somebody who had been, all of them actually, that had been working with the RAF. They were regarded as traitors. He lost his temper once when he was trying to get some food tickets, and he said that he realised he'd made a very bad mistake, because from that point on he stood out and they were after him, and he wouldn't sign the communist documents, to become a communist. And so, the writing was on the wall that he really did need to quit. And there's that lovely letter that he sent to Mummy in Brno. He said, we must pack up, we must pack things up discreetly. You must say that you're going to see your parents. They were allowed to visit their parents, their British wives, but they couldn't take their husbands with them. Mm-hmm. It's such a shame, really, that because she had made great family ties by then. She'd really got into being a Czech wife. And,
yes. She could speak Czech right until the end of her life.
Yes, she could actually.
Yeah, she could.
And of course we spoke Czech, didn't we?
I did, yes. I spoke Czech until I was 5, until I went to school.
And then we realised that, this is a little bit difficult because we can't speak English properly, but we got over that.
Your mother decided to flee to England, but your father arrived much later.
Oh, yes.
He did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he came through the forest with a group of other people who were trying to get out, and they were pretended to be forest wardens, so they couldn't have suitcases and things like that. They had just minimum amount of luggage and his violin. He brought his violin. So there's no record, there's no photographs of that. Normally he took photographs everywhere he went, and so that's why we've got so many. But during that period he had to be very discreet, very quiet.
They couldn't actually knock on people's doors and ask for help because of the number of people. They were unsure about whether they were informants, so they really lived rough. And I think it took 3 months or something like that for them to walk across. They went into the American sector. Eventually he ended up in the British sector. And there's the picture of the berry.
He wore that berry all the way through both escapes, and there's pictures of him sitting there with this berry on. And then when he met President Havel, he had the same berry on. And it's got the Czech army badge on it, hasn't it, that berry?
He wore it in a particular way that was very distinctive, like this.
No, to one side.
All right, to one side.
That's it.
I guess with the badge, but it was kind of pulled down like this. And there's a picture of him in Marseille in the dockyards marching with his men, and it was unmistakably Dad because of the berry.
Did he rejoin the Royal Air Force?
He was flying in the RAF for a time, and then in the RAF you have to retire from flying at a certain age, and then he went into ground to become part of the staff. He was training people, and he ended up at RAF Northolt, the oldest Royal Air Force station in the country, and he controlled the movements of aircraft that were coming in and out of the airport.
And he did all his journeys from Stamford out to all these different postings he had, didn't he?
Yes.
Long journeys on the motorbike. He'd come back. He didn't really want to be in the RAF. He wanted to be in architecture, you know, but this was the only way he could earn his living. He put up with it for many years, and he saw us all through our education, and finally he did what he wanted to do.
He became an architect.
He did. We were very happy for him, weren't we?
Yes, and he studied for the last
4 years.
4 years, was it? 4
at
years.
night school.
He went to night school when he was in the Royal Air Force coming up to retirement. He spent 4 years doing that refresher course to do a British diploma in architecture, so that obviously he was qualified then to be able to get employment. And he got employment with George Wimpey's, who are a very large construction company, and actually held quite a reasonable position. So,
Yes, but it was so different to the kind of architecture that he'd learnt, which was modernist. You know, Czech was at the forefront of modernist architecture. Wimpey's wasn't really his cup of tea. It was very sort of...
well, it was domestic. It
domestic
was building
architecture,
flats,
yes.
building blocks of flats and things
Yeah.
like that. Wasn't really challenging from an architectural point of view. But then he went and helped my brother Phil in his architectural business, where he was able to do more of the freedom in design.
He was very artistic.
Oh, very, yes. You know, I looked up these words about the Czech characteristics,
Yes.
and I realised that he had them all. Every Czech is a musician. So he played the accordion, the violin, the viola and the piano, right? And then the second thing was golden hands. Czech people can fix anything, and he could fix anything. And then the third one was sense of patriotism, like everything Czech is nice. We love our country, we love Czech things. And then the last one was that word pohoda, a sense of well-being and crafting and being with loved ones. He loved being with the family. He missed his family in Czechia so much. So he was always, as soon as he could, he went back after 20 years when Dušek was there. We all went back. And that was the first time he'd seen his mother for 20 years. And it was very emotional. And then he went back in 68 and 86, and then they came here. And this recent visit was really quite a few people turned up in Prague to see us. The house where my dad hung out before, when they was being chased by the
Security people.
we found it on the address from one of his letters, and he'd written to Mother to come, you know, that he was okay and that he was staying with these people. We had fun, you know, we looked up all the addresses on all the letters and went round and tried to find out who did what.
Yes.
We never got to Brno though,
Yes.
that time.
When I was in Brno, I went to the house where I was as a baby.
Did you?
Yes, I did, yeah. It was strange. Really was strange.
You and your sister decided to study the Royal College of Art.
Well, they decided to have us. We both went to Harrow, and it really annoyed me because they changed all the courses. So she did 3 years at Harrow, I did 4. And I did 4 years at Royal and she did 3. And she came out with the exact same pieces of paper. And it gave us both a good living. She went in one direction, more towards theatre, and I went more to the rag trade, you know.
You were a successful designer, no? It was fashion and jewellery.
I started off in jewellery, but I switched to fashion because there was more jobs, and also I was offered to do pop stars. 3 pop stars wanted their dress ranges to be sold. One was Lulu, another one was Twiggy, she was a model, and the other one was Sandy Shaw. And then I worked with Jeff Banks later. But I got very fed up with actually the fast pace of the fashion industry, because you'd have to do ranges every 3 months. And although it was interesting, I thought that I got fed up with the body and went in for more interiors. And then I went into teaching.
You were 3 years old.
Yes,
when,
3.5, yes.
Yeah, when you
Yes.
escaped from Czechoslovakia with your family.
Yes.
Do you have a memory or
Well, I have
souvenir?
no memory of those 3.5 years. I remember the flight from Czechoslovakia. I don't know why it's such a memory of being above the clouds. It's just something I can see it as clear as anything, even now. Czech was the language in the home between mum and dad, and Paula spoke Czech. I went to school speaking Czech, and it was difficult because they didn't understand anything. The school said to my parents, "You must speak English at home if you want your son to learn to speak English quickly." And within a year I spoke English. So we moved to RF Hendon, which is in North London, and my father had a married quarter, which is where you're able to bring your family. So as Paula was saying, when we lived in Stamford we had a house, and he was going off to the various RAF stations, coming home at the weekend. And really in that time...
They were together, weren't they?
No, in Stamford I never really knew my father. He was this man that came home on a motorbike, dressed in these enormous clothes, and he was, as Paula said, he was very tired and grumpy. And when we moved to RAF Hendon, that changed because he came home every day. But I never really found my father in a very close way. He was a good provider, always interested in our education and, you know, so on and so forth. And it remained like that for quite a long time. And I didn't help when I became a teenager because I was doing all kinds of naughty things and my father was not impressed. If you look at our family history in Czechoslovakia, going back hundreds of years...
1750.
We were builders. Didn't know that at the time, but maybe it's why I and certainly my younger brother, we took to it so well. I went to building college, had a really good time. It was the swinging 60s and I didn't actually achieve anything, and my father said, "Right, that's it, no more, get yourself a job. I'm not keeping you at college anymore." I found it quite a hard decision, but he was right. And actually it was the best thing that he ever did, because I then got a job and I started learning as I was earning. So I had a job where I could go to college in the evening and had a day release and all those. And then over a course of 7 years, I got my professional qualifications, which I have now as a chartered builder. And I did that for 25 years, and they were the best working years of my life. I was interested in the Czech family, but I was never interested in really getting kind of involved in it. I didn't really want to go. And my father was really quite upset that I showed no interest in it. But eventually my mother convinced me to go. I flew to Brno, really excited about it in the sense that it was going to be a great weekend. And I walked down the steps of the airplane, and when I put my foot on the ground, it just something welled up inside me. It just like completely overwhelmed me, and it stopped all the people who were coming down the steps behind me, because I just literally broke down and I was boo-hooing, and my brothers were kind of going, come on, Pete, pull yourself together. And I just couldn't help it. Outside was the whole of the Czech family. And exactly the same thing happened again when I saw them all, and they were obviously there to greet us, particularly my father's sister. And she kind of came up and got hold of me and said, Petra, 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 Petra. And she was kind of looking at me like I was dad, because I do look somewhat like my dad. So I realised actually that what he was talking about was something that I had completely dismissed, but wrongly, because it's really important. That's my roots.
You became a London 2012 Olympic Games chaplain at the Heathrow Airport.
Yes, and also during that construction period, I worked a lot in London. If you've ever heard of the Barbican Cultural Centre, in my training days I worked on it, and then in my business I worked on it. And then I happened to work with an architect who was part of the Worshipful Company of Constructors, which is an ancient organisation. They're called guilds. And I was asked to take the freedom of the City of London. So in the footsteps of Dick Whittington, he was the person who was first awarded the right to drive his sheep over London Bridge. And I still have that right to drive my sheep over London Bridge.
You are still chaplain at
And I'm still a chaplain at Heathrow. I've been a chaplain for 12 years. My role really as a chaplain is amongst the staff, because there's 77,000 people work at Heathrow. It's a big parish.
How has your Czech heritage influenced your life?
As with all refugees, I feel for people who come and they haven't got the first language, and it makes you more determined. And I noticed that when we were teaching, because we often used to get people in from Afghanistan or Bosnia or somewhere where there was trouble in the world, and we found that they were very, very directed towards how they were going to use their lives. And I think that helped us a lot, that, we didn't quite fit in.
When I look at my family, my brothers and sisters, and this is not arrogance, but I think we're all achievers. We're all very high, determined achievers. And I think that's a very Czech attribute to have. First time when I went to the Czech Republic in 2006, I couldn't believe the rate of advance that there was in the years since communism fell.
That's true.
It was extraordinary. And I think that is by nature, that is the way Czech people are. And I think I carry those attributes. I am a very determined person. People say about me, you're not British. People that know me well say, I know you speak good English, but we can see that you're not British, that I'm more continental.